Hi, my name is Kelsey, and I did my educational report on Jacques Rousseau. He was born in June on the 28th, 1712, to parents Isaac Rousseau and Susan Bernard in Geneva. Geneva was at the time a city-state and a Protestant associate of the Swiss Confederacy. Unfortunately for Rousseau, he had a lot of tragedy in his life. Right after he was born, his mother passed away, and at about age 5, his older brother, an only brother, ran away from home. At age 10, up until age 10, he had grown up with his father, but his father got into a tiff with a French soldier, and because of this, he felt that he had to run away and flee the country, or he would be put in jail. So after his dad fled the country, he left his son with one of his relatives, and this relative was his uncle. His uncle had a boy about the same age as him, and he decided to send both of them to school in a village called Beausset. After 2 years of formal education, Rousseau started doing apprentice work for an engraver at age 13. Unfortunately for him, he ended up with an abusive teacher, and so he decided to run away at age 15. And he ended up leaving the country, and when he left the country, he ended up stumbling upon the Catholic religion, and he started to train to be a Catholic priest. After he trained to be a Catholic priest, he wasn't sure that he wanted to be a Catholic priest, and so he went off to kind of figure out what he wanted to do with his life. He had various careers over his adult life. He was a musician, a copyist, and he was a teacher at some point. So it wasn't until 1745 that he met his companion. Her name was Therese Levesa. They had 5 children together, and he ended up sending them to the orphanage. And at that time, it wasn't common for children to survive an orphanage. It would later come back to bite him when people were talking about how, they were talking about how he had gotten rid of his children, even though he was talking about educational reforms and how to raise children when he had done such a terrible thing. So 5 years after meeting his wife, he entered an essay contest, and his essay was about the progression of sciences and arts and how it has caused the corruption of virtue and morality. So this piece of work was his very first piece, and it became quite well known. He took first place, and then the world just started reading it. It laid the groundwork for a second piece, which is the Discourse on the Origin of Inequality. It wasn't a winner like its predecessor, but it still had quite a bit of fame, and people still read it quite a bit. So with this, it just kind of solidified his stance as an intellectual person. So one of his most famous writings was The Social Contract, and it came out in 1762. A lot of people thought this was his best contribution to just general knowledge, but a lot of people would argue that his educational philosophies are his greatest work. So while this Social Contract was getting a lot of praise, his other big piece was called Emily, and it's a treatise on the nature of education and the nature of man. So Jacques Rousseau thought this was his best piece of work. The text from the book Emily is divided into 5 books, and the first books are about a child named Emily. The 4th is about basically an explanation of the adolescent, and the 5th is the outlining education of his female counterpart, Sophie. It is in this book that where John Rousseau shows us his education philosophies. And in the book, it talks about how children need to be loved and cared for, and it actually before this, before his writings, in that time period, it was very common for parents just to use their children basically for labor, and there wasn't a whole lot of caring and nurturing going on. So after this book, a lot of moms started like nurturing their children more, and it's kind of set that standard. As we've been learning in my English class, that instead of being seen as financial necessities, they are becoming to be seen as what is known as little angels, who could do nothing wrong. The other things that he talked about, he believed that all children develop at their own pace and on their own terms. He also taught that children need to have more interactions with the world and less with books. This example showed the parents that children need to be actively engaged in their studies and that parents can help them acquire knowledge. He thought that it was important for children to get hands-on experience in the work and with manual labor and skills, but he also thought at the same time that they should have a good role model, and that too much manual labor is basically like abuse. So as we can see, Jacques Rousseau did a lot for the education movement. Before, children were not seen as the way we look at them today, and he really did help grow that. So unfortunately, his views were not always very popular, and he was ran out of the country because of his book, and it was controversial, and so it was banned from not only Geneva, but it was also banned from Switzerland. And eventually it would be a inspiration for the French Revolution and for the reform of the educational system. And although he did not get the credit he rightly deserved when he was alive, we do appreciate all that he has done. And that's it.
Oh, it's so bad. It's okay though. It's okay. It's done.
How long is it, Kyra?